So how I first learned about the hyper missile was Joe was like, "Did you hear about they grounded all the planes in America?" I was like, "For what?" She goes, "North Korea fired this missile off and they can't track it because it goes so fast. It's hypersonic." And I was like, "They grounded all their airplanes for that?" I would think if there was a nuke coming towards us, we'd all want to be in airplanes. I don't know.
Yeah,
Just thinking.
I would think, right?
So I just kind of blew it off, and it was kind of a shit trading day, kind of like a red market. And I was like, I don't really want to short anything because I'm not sure, because that's usually how that goes. Like red market, short it. And the next thing you know, it just goes full green. You're like, crap. So I was just kind of chilling. I looked it up, or I was trying to look it up. And it comes to, well, no, they just did a ground halt for the West Coast. And then come to find out, I was like, NORAD, they wouldn't even comment on it. They're like, and then I saw where there was an air traffic controller, I think somewhere on the West Coast, told somebody in a Cessna, all planes are grounded in the U.S. It was like, how does it snowball so far out of control like that?
Well, and here's the funny thing is North Korea, it probably never even got off the launch pad. And they're like, it's so fast. Like we lost track of it or whatever. And secretly, they're like taking some dude to like one of their many re-education camps because he was the guy that was, the engineer that was in charge of this missile. And it was like a total flop or something. Yeah. A little background with Korea, if you don't know. I spent a year in Korea in the Army on the demilitarized zone of this. It's no longer there. It's called Camp Greaves. It was a 506. And the only thing closer to the that's actually on the DMZ is called a JSA, Joint Security Area. And that's where they have all the meetings between the North and South Korean leaders.
Wait, didn't they blow that up? Didn't North Korea blow up the building?
I don't know.
No, I think they made a new building 3 or 4 years ago, and then they got.
I haven't even, to be honest with you,
it was weird.
I haven't even been following that stuff.
I'm pretty sure they had a building that North Korea, South Korea had built together.
It should be at the JSA.
This was when Trump was in office.
Yeah.
And then something went a little south. I don't know if it was with the U.S. or with South Korea exactly. But North Korea went in and they blew the whole entire building. It was like, you guys just built that. You don't have food, but you're blowing up the building you just built.
I haven't been tracking that, but that wouldn't surprise me given the North Korean leadership. I mean, they call it the Hermit Kingdom for a reason, right? It's like, have you ever seen the satellite photos of like lights at night all around the globe? And then they basically take a satellite and go over North Korea.
Oh, I haven't actually seen anything over North Korea.
But they have like these satellite photos, right? Of basically all the lights, like meaning, showing, people have electric and whatnot. And they'll go, they'll take the satellite photo of the United States and they'll have all the hot spots like New York City and LA and all this kind of stuff, right?
East Coast, West Coast is lit up like Christmas tree. Indiana is really dark.
Yeah. Well,
it's about like the Hermit Kingdom, right? The flyover states are all dark.
Well, they basically go over, over North and South Korea. In South Korea, places like Seoul and other places that are, awesome places, very westernized, are all lit up, like the 4th of July. And then they pan to North Korea and there's like a few spots of like some guy with a candle or something on some path somewhere or whatever. It's no secret that they've been starving their people, basically that you have Kim Jong-un Kim Jong-un or something is the current leader. And he had his dad, like Kim Jong-il and all these people, but there's no outside access to internet, nothing like that. And there's some documentaries out there and stuff like that on this if you're interested in it. It's like on YouTube and a couple other things. Yeah,
I've watched a few on North Korea, which was really interesting.
Yeah, very like propaganda organized, like very controlled, whatever. They make it seem like the place is like happy, and it's like the movie The Interview or whatever with Seth Rogen and where he goes by and there's like
much
supermarket
propaganda just around
like
that movie.
Yeah, there's like supermarket, that's got all this food in there, and then they realize that it's fake or whatever.
Right.
That's true, man. That they do all that stuff. Their supreme leader, as they call him, or whatever. There's like weird things, like he has a wife and has had a wife since like 2008 or something.
Really?
And she's not allowed to make like any public interviews.
Oh, actually, no, she did go. Somebody said they thought that she was dead not too long, a few years back.
Yeah, well, who knows? Yeah. Well, they thought he was dead. They thought he like had some kind of heart surgery or something. They thought he was dead.
People still might think it's his double though, because there's a lot of rumor about look at how much weight he's lost here recently.
Well, the scary thing is we were worried about it, like the intelligence communities and whatnot were worried about it because his prime successor was like his sister, and she's worse than he is.
That's the vibe. I can't remember. They had like terms for her, like the Black Widow or the Serpent of Death or something. I don't know, something crazy, right? But she was supposedly worse than he is as far as like being a dictator or whatever. He's like hangs out with Dennis Rodman and like, does whatever he does, right? Oh my God, Dennis Rodman of all.
Dennis Rodman,
like, really?
Right?
That's your go-to guy is Dennis Rodman. It's like,
yeah, again, I won't even comment on that one, but all of their money that they make, basically does go towards like preparing for some war that's probably never going to come between, whatever.
Well,
every once in a while, he starts throwing his weight around and like talking shit and doing all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
China controls them. They're the one that smacks him back into reality or whatever. He is, he's a facade. Like now don't get me wrong. He's got nuclear weapons, which is what scares us because he is just crazy enough to use them. And he's like put out propaganda videos of him like launching.
Well, I see him being that guy, which was funny because everybody, well, not everybody, but there were certain people in the White House when Trump was leaving office, afraid that Trump was going to go start a war. It's like, you're worried about Trump starting a war? I would be a little more worried about that shit crazy North Korea just launching a nuke because like, I've only got a week to live. I'm going to die from heart disease. Well, on my last day, guess what? I'm just going to launch all of our nukes all over the world. Why not?
I'm going to show them, I'll show them a thing or two. It just
seems like that was his mentality, but.
Well, I always think of this, and again, my brain is like not right. You want to talk about tinfoil hats, right? You ever heard of this cat called Nostradamus, Michel de Nostradamus? He was a 15th century psychic guy. I watched it. The only reason why I got on a kick literally like years and years ago, I was probably still, I think it was like 14 or something. I watched this literally what was like a documentary back then. It's called The Man Who Saw Tomorrow. And they were talking about Michel de Nostradamus or whatever. This guy that supposedly made all these predictions.
Worthless book of knowledges.
I know. It's endless. But he would write this stuff in what they call quatrains or whatever, which is basically he was hiding from the Spanish Inquisition. Like he didn't want to be like basically anybody that they saw like doing that at the time they thought were like witches and whatnot. Like that's how old it was, right? So he would write it. He's a very educated guy. He's actually a doctor. They said if he had never been known for his psychic abilities, if you will, being able to be, a seer of the future, he would have went down in history because he's the one that came up with the practices of like washing your hands during the plague. And he lost his wife and kids to the plague, the real plague. Not some made up pandemic shit we got going on here. The actual
Allegedly.
plague.
You can't say there's not.
I know it's not made up. Get your vaccinations, people. But anyways, he came up with the idea of like basically washing your hands and like there was some hokey shit that he did about like using some kind of herbs and whatnot of, whatever. But it was more like it would have been like the modern day equivalent of like a throat lozenge. It was like some rose petals and like all this kind of stuff to help with whatever, ease the pain. Mm-hmm. But he's the one that basically came up with like washing your hands and like doing all this kind of stuff. Like he came up with the idea of like, hey, we probably shouldn't just move all the family back into the house where the dead person just had the plague, which is how it spread or like whatever.
Right, yeah.
So they said he would have went down in history as being a doctor, a physician. But he was also trained from his like grandfather, I believe, in like Latin. And like he's like spoke multiple languages and a lot of like ancient languages. So when he wrote his quatrains, he wrote them in like a series of like a bunch of old languages. And so when the Spanish Inquisition came around, if they found his books, they couldn't read them. And so so somewhere along the way, somebody has deciphered this stuff, right? And some people will say it's hokey because it's like it's like unfortunately, it's like Bible verses and stuff. Not that I'm talking, shit about organized religion, but stuff subject to interpretation.
Yeah.
Like I can say on the 9th day of the 11th month of the year 2022, a plane will fall from the sky. And then somewhere 100 years from now, somebody will come back and look in the records and be like, oh, not that Cessna in Iowa fell from the sky.
Cessna in Iowa.
He must be a psychic, right?
Right.
So if you do it vague enough, right, you get a hit every once in a while, right? But he talks about Antichrist. He says there's like 3 Antichrists if you want to be like religious, right? I believe the first Antichrist was Napoleon. And he called him like Napan Ra or something. Basically, it was like a play on words because he knew French and because I think he was French, but he had like Latin and stuff in there. He called Napan Ra, basically talking about Napoleon being the first Antichrist. The second one, he called him Hister. He missed his name by 1 letter. Instead of Hitler, he called him Hister. And he basically says, he'll grow up on the banks of the Rhine River, which is where Hitler grew up. He'll come from Austria and he talks about what he would allude to things like what we called the Blitzkrieg, his mentality and all this kind of stuff, and how he'd bring the world to his knees, and which he almost did. But he talks about this third Antichrist that he calls him like Moab or something along that. But he calls him the king of the Mongols, as in his quatrains. And then you start, in my kid brain, I start thinking about, where's kid brain? Yeah, in my kid brain, like back then, I start thinking about, where I'm super weird. The reason why I'm a book of useless knowledge, I'm dating myself. Being born in 75, I grew up on a farm out in the middle of nowhere. I got most of my information from the book of encyclopedias that some dude came along and sold my dad.
Oh,
sold to my mom, and then my dad got mad.
I had my mom gave me the whole entire book of encyclopedia, whoever, when I was little. I love those
Encyclopedia Britannica or whatever it was.
I read that thing like there was no tomorrow.
I did too. I had nothing else to do because I lived out in the middle of nowhere. So I, like an idiot, I wouldn't maybe like an idiot, but like, some weirdo, I read encyclopedias.
No, it's not a weirdo thing. Well, I mean, I did it too. So I don't think we're both weirdos.
Wow. Well, I think, maybe we are, but, so, along with like obviously watching a tape over, The Man Who Saw Tomorrow, Michel de Nostradamus, before Nostradamus was like a big thing, before the internet and like whatnot, right? But long story short is, if that one quatrain, the biggest thing, you got to realize when I grew up, you're worried about the Red Scare and like, you're worried about being nuked and all this kind of stuff. And he talks about the third Antichrist. There's several quatrains about the third Antichrist and what comes before essentially the end of the world per se. And one of the things is he says the sky will burn at like 50 degrees or something like that, which is New York City. So when like 9/11 happened, I'm snapping back to like my 14-year-old self being like, man, I remember him talking about, this guy knows what the hell he's talking about. Right.
Right.
So totally didn't buy into it. But then he talks about, basically how to identify, if you will, the third Antichrist. And he's talking about this Moab or whatever the hell it was. But he starts talking about like where he'll come from. Basically they said he'll come out of nowhere and he comes from the king of Mongols. And in my kid brain, I start looking at like where the Mongols, or not Mongols, I'm talking about the motorcycle gang, not the Mongols. What are the Genghis Khan? Yeah, I know it's terrible. Mongols.
That just now clicked in my brain. I was like,
not Mongols.
Wait a minute, the Mongols. Yeah. Oh no, is that like
Genghis Khan? Is it Mongols? Maybe that is the Mongols.
No, it's not the Mongols.
Yeah.
I can't laugh at like
whoever. Genghis Khan was the king of
Mongolians
or whatever.
Mongolians, Mongols.
Again, a lot of people don't realize, thing, right? At the time, Genghis Khan literally took over the majority of the known world at the time. Like he's a lot more prolific or whatever you want to call it than a lot of people give him credit for. Do
you suppose that's why the Chinese are hating on the Mongolians so much?
Maybe. I mean, they basically, fun fact, Genghis Khan.
Yes, I like fun facts.
His burial site, when he died, he had a group of people build his burial site. So when he died, and then they basically took him to his burial site, and then they killed everybody that built his burial site, so they wouldn't know the true spot of where he's buried at. So anybody that was ever involved with it,
people that killed the people that, they would know.
I don't know.
That's just,
well, they basically, it would have been like they went to some spot, they went and dropped them off, and then when they came back, another group of people, their job was to kill those people so that nobody would ever know where he was truly buried at. So nobody knows the true location of where Genghis Khan was buried. But even to this day, there's a large percentage of the Earth's population that has a small percentage that dates back to Mongolians or Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan had like 100 damn concubines or whatever the hell you call it. Like he was slinging that dick everywhere, man. he was just like, he was popping out kids like it was his job, right?
Out kids. Like it was his job. Well, actually, you know what? I mean, that's the thing though. It's like, you want to repopulate the earth with like-minded, like people.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's where craziness comes in at.
Well, the English